Watch out, it's a tiger. The warning slipping between breath and binoculars became a phrase freighted with dread for Allied tankers. Yet what often lurked in the rubble and tree lines was less mythical than mechanical. Smoldering hulks, broken tracks, or sometimes nothing at all. Paranoia, rumor, and the very real lethality of one machine combined to create an aura that outlived the war itself. This is the story of the Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger E, the Tiger One, Germany's iconic heavy tank. Not born in a single flash of genius, the Tiger was the product of shifting demands, industrial compromise, and battlefield necessity. Its lineage begins in the late 1930s when the Wehrmacht asked for a new breakthrough vehicle. Multiple firms answered the call. Henschel and Porsche submitted rival designs. Henschel's robust, if conservative, approach won the production contract after trials and revisions. Designers intended the Tiger to dominate armored engagements. Early specifications called for heavy armor and a potent gun. Wartime experience accelerated those demands. Encounters in 1940, and more decisively, the brutal encounters with Soviet armor in 1941. The thick-clad KV series and the revolutionary T-34 exposed German vulnerabilities. The result was a new class of heavy tank, one meant to punch through the toughest defenses and shrug off counterfire. By the time the Tiger entered production in 1942, it represented an answer to the Soviet challenge. Heavy, lethal, and engineered to survive. On paper, the Tiger was an intimidating machine. Combat weight hovered around 57 metric tons. Its hull and turret were slab-sided and unapologetically thick. Frontal armor typically measured 100 millimeter, sides around 80 millimeter. Protection that, at typical combat ranges, could blunt most Allied anti-tank weapons of the early war years. The main armament, and the feature most responsible for the Tiger's fearsome reputation, was the 88mm WW2 36L/56. Adapted from the famed anti-aircraft Flak 36, this gun combined high muzzle velocity with heavy armor-piercing shells. The result was a weapon that could engage and destroy enemy tanks at ranges where the enemy could not effectively reply. The Tiger's internals were no less ambitious. Initial vehicles used a Maybach HL210 V12 engine, but the extra mass of the production hulls quickly necessitated more power. The later HL230 P45, producing roughly 700 metric horsepower, became the standard fitment. Despite this, the Tiger was no sprinter. On road, it might reach 38 to 40 kilometers per hour, roughly 24 to 25 miles per hour, in ideal conditions. But cross-country speeds and reliability suffered under weight and mechanical stress. Fuel consumption was prodigious. Operational ranges of 70 to 120 kilometers under favorable conditions were typical. In practice, logistics often became the Tiger's greatest enemy. Mobility was aided by an unusual and visually striking running gear. 48 interleaved road wheels per side ran on torsion bar suspension. This wide footprint helped distribute weight and smooth the ride, but it complicated maintenance. To reach an inner wheel required removing several outer wheels, an ordeal in mud or under fire. Rubber rim shortages later in the war forced some German workshops to fit steel-rimmed wheels, reducing comfort and increasing wear. Production realities intervened at every step. The Tiger was expensive and labor-intensive. Each hull demanded hundreds of thousands of man-hours and consumed critical resources, costing the Reich a sum far greater than a Panzer IV or Panther. Between August 1942 and August 1944, roughly 1,350 to 1,355 Tiger Warmate tanks were completed, numbers that made the vehicle rare enough to fuel legend. Crew composition reflected the machine's complexity. 5 men, driver and radio operator in the hull, commander, gunner, and loader in the turret. Crews often received special training and close maintenance instruction at the factories. Operating a Tiger demanded both tactical skill and mechanical competence. When well employed, Tigers could dominate a local battlefield. Far more than mere firepower, tactical placement mattered. Hold-down positions, ambushes from concealed flanks, and coordinated fire control made a Tiger a force multiplier. A single gun, well-placed and well-aimed, could destroy multiple enemy tanks before being properly targeted. Tales of Tiger aces, crews that tallied long kill lists. became part fact, part wartime myth. Michael Wittmann's actions in 1944 are among the best known, though wartime claims and post-war stories often blur reality with legend. Yet the Tiger had fatal weaknesses. Complexity bred unreliability. Transmissions and final drives were frequent failure points, and the tank could be immobilized not by enemy fire but by mechanical breakdown. Its weight restricted bridge crossings and limited strategic mobility. The logistical burden, fuel, spare parts, recovery vehicles, multiplied per Tiger fielded. The German solution often involved deploying Tigers defensively in static strong points or ambushes where their firepower could be decisive while supply lines strained less. Still, the Tiger's psychological impact was disproportionate to its numbers. Allied crews who encountered Tigers often reported a near mythic fear, whether justified or not. The vehicle's reputation was amplified by photographs, newsreels, and post-war cinema, cementing a legacy that blends engineering excellence with wartime drama. Museum pieces preserve fragments of that legacy. Tiger 131, captured in Tunisia and now restored at the Tank Museum in Bovington, is a rare survivor whose engine was later replaced with an HL-230 to render it operating for displays. Its existence allows modern audiences to peer at and hear a mechanical icon that once altered battlefield calculations. By 1943 and 1944, the Tiger had become a focal point of both German doctrine and Allied countermeasures. Its operational history can be read as a catalog of tactical successes tempered by strategic limits. In North Africa, on the Eastern Front, and in the Bocage of Normandy, Tigers could and did turn the tide of localized engagements, but they never altered the strategic trajectory of the war. Understanding why requires looking at how they were employed, how opponents adapted, and how industrial realities shaped their fate. Tactics and employment. German armored doctrine prized combined arms coordination. The Tiger was intended as the spearhead for breakthrough and exploitation, operating with infantry, reconnaissance, and supporting artillery. In practice, commanders used Tigers in several recurring roles. When used offensively, Tigers led breakthroughs, engaging fortifications and destroying enemy armor from standoff ranges. Defensively, they excelled in prepared positions. Hull down on reverse slopes, concealed in orchards or woods, or massed behind hedgerows. Here, their thick frontal armor and accurate 88mm gun allowed them to ambush advancing Allied tanks and knock them out before return fire could be coordinated. Yet the Tiger's utility depended on crew training and tactical situation. A Tiger alone in open country risked being outflanked or bogged down. In close terrain, the limited traverse and slow turret speed could be liabilities. Radio coordination, reconnaissance that identified suitable fields of fire, and engineering support for crossing obstacles all determined whether a Tiger would be decisive or simply a lost asset. Notable combat episodes. Few engagements captured the Tiger mystique more than the fighting around Villers Bocage in June 1944, where Michael Wittmann's single Tiger of heavy SS Panzer Division 101 wreaked havoc among British columns, ambushing tanks, transports, and infantry from a concealed position in the town. Wittmann's action, controversial in exact claims and later heavily mythologized, illustrates how a skilled crew, a well-placed gun, and surprise could produce outsized results. Conversely, Kursk in July 1943 shows the Tiger's limits in massed armor clashes. The Kursk battlefield, vast, deeply prepared, and full of mines and anti-tank defenses, presented logistical and tactical challenges that even heavy armor struggled to overcome. Tigers inflicted losses, but they also suffered breakdowns, mine damage, and attrition at a scale that logistics could not easily replace. Countermeasures and Allied adaptation. Allies adapted quickly, armor-piercing rounds improved, dedicated tank destroyers, like the Soviet Su-85 and later the ISU series, and Allied designs such as the British Achilles and US M36. Fielded guns that could challenge the Tiger at range. Tactical responses evolved. Greater use of flanking fire, air attacks, fighters and fighter bombers. Artillery concentration and deception reduced the Tiger's tactical invulnerability. Intelligence and reconnaissance aimed to locate tigers and ambush their supply lines, removing a tiger's mobility, immobilizing it with mines, engine damage, or track brakes was often enough to neutralize it. Reliability and logistics. Behind every battlefield, triumph was a series of logistical realities few popular accounts emphasize. A tiger required fuel, spares, recovery vehicles, and trained mechanics. When a tiger broke down, recovering it often demanded a heavy recovery tractor and several hours under potentially hostile conditions. The Kriegsmarine-like complexity of German heavy tanks. The interleaved wheels, specialized parts, and precise tolerances meant field repairs were slow. In winter conditions on the Eastern Front, frozen final drives or clogged suspension components could render a tiger helpless. As the war progressed and Germany's logistical network fragmented, tigers were stranded more frequently than they were destroyed outright. Variance and experimentation. While the standard Tiger I is the best-known form, the chassis and concept spawned variants and experiments. The command version carried extra radios and internal changes for staff work. The Sturmtiger, a later separate heavy assault vehicle, employed a 380mm rocket mortar for bunker busting and urban demolition, built on a Tiger-like chassis conceptually but heavily modified. Recovery and bridging variants were trialed, and field workshops often improvised fixes or specialized fittings. Porsche's original involvement gave rise to prototypes with alternative drivetrains, but production standardized on Henschel's layout for reliability and maintainability. Industrial and political context. The Tiger also embodies the tension between quality and quantity. German high command, influenced by interwar thinking and early successes that rewarded technological superiority, invested in powerful but expensive platforms. Each Tiger's massive resource and labor cost meant fewer tanks overall. By contrast, Allied designs increasingly emphasized mass production and adaptability. The Panther, meant to be a compromise between mobility, protection, and firepower, still proved complex and costly. The Panzer IV continued as an adaptable workhorse. In the end, numbers and logistics, along with overwhelming Allied industrial output and air superiority, mattered more than the technical edge a Tiger could provide in isolated battles. Post-war legacy and myth. In the post-war era, the Tiger became a symbol, a cinematic villain, or a mechanical marvel depending on the storyteller. Photographs, newsreels, and war correspondence highlighted its victories and ignored context, the breakdowns, the supply shortfalls, the statistical rarity. Films and wargaming culture amplified the legend. Tiger terror became shorthand for a terrifying, nearly invulnerable foe. Historians since have worked to separate myth from measurable effect. The truth is complex. In many tactical situations, a Tiger was indeed superior. Strategically, however, its costliness and the realities of modern mechanized warfare limited its impact. Survivors and remembrance. Only a handful of Tigers survive today. Hulks and museum pieces that serve as tangible connections to the machine's dual nature. Tiger 131 at Bovington, restored to running condition with a replacement HL230 engine, allows visitors to hear the clatter of its V12 and stand beside an object that once altered tactical calculations. These survivors invite more measured reflection, admiration for engineering and firepower, and an understanding of the human and material costs embedded in those capabilities. Conclusion. The Tiger is a study in contrasts, a triumph of engineering that created both tactical fear and logistical headaches. A tank whose reputation sometimes outpaced its strategic utility. Its roar across the battlefield remains one of World War II's most recognizable sounds. But the wider story shows how technology, doctrine, industry, and human skill combined to determine outcomes in war. The Tiger's legend endures because on its best days, it was fear-made steel, and on its worst, a reminder that machines alone cannot win wars. Behind the steel exterior and battlefield legend lies the daily reality of Tiger crews. Maintenance, appetite for fuel and parts, boredom punctuated by violent bursts of fear. Life inside a Tiger was intimate and claustrophobic. 5 men lived and fought within a space roughly the size of a small room, sharing heat, fumes, in the constant clank of metal. In combat, the commander's cupola was both a perch and a target. His situational awareness could make or break an engagement. The gunner depended on optical sights. Early vehicles carried a stabilized periscope and a prismatic TZF sight that delivered exceptional accuracy for the era. But effective long-range shooting still relied on training, range estimation, and a steady platform. Loading the 88mm was a physical task. The shells were heavy, about 10 to 11 kilograms for AP rounds, and the autoloaders of later Cold War designs were decades away. The loader's stamina and pacing determined sustained firing rate. Crews trained to a drumbeat: aim, load, fire, check, reload. When everything worked, the Tiger could dominate a duel at ranges where opponents could not effectively reply. When maintenance lagged or an engine seized, the same vehicle could become a stationary tomb. Recovery and salvage stories underscore a logistical truth. Battlefield kills are often supply kills. Many Tigers were lost not to penetrating hits, but to tracks ripped by mines, damaged final drives, or burned-out engines. Salvage crews would attempt field repairs with heavy jacks, improvised rails, and sometimes brute force. But when recovery vehicles could not reach a disabled tank under fire, crews had to destroy radios and sensitive equipment and abandon ship. Photographs from the Eastern Front show Tigers abandoned in snow, half-buried in drifts, or stripped of components by advancing forces. Such images puncture the myth of indestructibility. Even the mightiest tank depended on fragile chains of supply. Air power reshaped engagements as well. The Tiger's armor resisted many small-caliber anti-aircraft strafing runs, but concentrated fighter-bomber strikes with rockets or armor-piercing bombs could seriously damage mobility systems and track assemblies. Allied air supremacy in 1944 increasingly exposed German armored concentrations to interdiction. For the Tiger, operating in exposed formations or on the march became more perilous as the Allies' ability to spot, strike, and disrupt supply convoys improved. The psychological dimension of the Tiger's presence also influenced how both sides fought. German crews took pride in their machines. Unit insignia, painted emblems, and crew nicknames reflected a subculture that revered mechanical excellence. Allied soldiers, conversely, learned to treat reports of Tigers with caution, often changing tactics. Reconnaissance screens moved further ahead, infantry scouts probed probable hiding spots, and tank crews adopted hull-down and shoot-and-scoot tactics to reduce exposure. Whether the fear was fully justified or not, it altered decisions and sometimes slowed advances, buying the Germans time they otherwise would not have had. Technical improvisation was a wartime constant. Frontline workshops cannibalized wrecks to keep Tigers running. Field engineers welded makeshift brackets, replaced radios with scrounged parts, and fitted extra stowage or armor where needed. Some field modifications were pragmatic: extended mufflers to reduce detectability, added sandbags for extra protection in urban fighting, or winterization kits for Eastern Front operations. Other changes reflected scarcity: wooden track grousers, improvised towing eyes, or patched suspension components kept machines operational long after factory service life would have suggested retirement. The Tiger's cultural afterlife is also interesting. For decades after the war, the tank appeared in cinema, literature, and collector culture as an emblem of engineering prowess and battlefield menace. Model kits, war games, and restoration projects kept a technical literature alive that both venerates and critiques. Veterans' memoirs added human perspective. Some recall terror and elation at the Tiger's firepower. Others describe the endless maintenance and constant risk that defined frontline service. Restoration efforts highlight the technical complexity that made the Tiger both legendary and rare. Restorers confront peppered armor, missing turret rings, and the problem of sourcing components that were produced in limited numbers more than 70 years ago. Tiger 131's restoration at Bovington is instructive. Captured in Tunisia in 1943 and preserved as a war trophy, it underwent painstaking conservation and mechanical overhaul to run again for static and demonstration purposes. Replacement engines, recreated radio sets, and reconstructed optics involve cross-disciplinary expertise. Historical research, machining, metallurgy, and a bit of detective work to match serial numbers and factory markings. The result, however, offers the public more than a relic. It provides a sensory connection to history, a chance to hear a V-12 cough to life, and to understand the scale and sound that so alarmed contemporaries. What strategic lessons does the Tiger teach today? Military historians often point to three broad takeaways. First, technological superiority can yield decisive local effects, but seldom substitutes for strategic depth in industrial-scale conflicts. Second, sustainment. Logistics, spare parts, fuel, recovery often determines whether technology translates into battlefield advantage. Third, doctrine and tactical employment are as important as raw capability. The best weapon, badly used, can be wasted or captured. Finally, the Tiger's story is inseparable from the human costs that accompany war. While it embodies technical achievement, each surviving hull is also a reminder of lives entangled with industrial machines, weary crews, factory workers pressed to meet quotas, and civilians who lived in zones stormed and scarred by armored warfare. Museums and memorials that display Tigers often pair the machinery with personal narratives, letters, photos, and oral histories, creating a more rounded understanding of the past. As we finish our look at the Tiger I, the image that endures is not singular. Sometimes it's the gleaming muzzle and perfect geometry of an 88mm barrel silhouetted against a smoky battlefield. Sometimes it's a cold, abandoned hulk in a snowy field. Both images matter. The Tiger was, at once, an engineering milestone and a strategic gamble, an icon that fires the imagination, but also a complex machine whose real impact needs to be weighed against the realities of logistics, tactics, and the larger currents of the war. If you want to understand the Tiger, go beyond the myth. Listen for the engine, read the maintenance logs, study the supply manifests, and talk to those who repaired and crewing them. Only then does the full picture emerge. Impressive, flawed, and profoundly human. To fully grasp the Tiger's story, we must trace it back into Germany's wartime industry. The mills, assembly halls, and political decisions that shaped not just a tank, but a way of war. The Tiger was not merely an answer to an enemy gun. It was a product of design philosophy and the constraints of a wartime state. The decision-making environment that birthed the Tiger mixed technical expertise, inter-service rivalry, and political pressure. Designers wanted the best armor and gun available. Commanders wanted decisive battlefield tools. Ministers wanted prestige symbols to showcase technological prowess. The result inevitably had trade-offs. At the factory level, production illustrated those dilemmas. Henschel's detailed patterns, hardened steel plates, and precision machining required skilled labor and time. Jigs, hammer presses, and riveting gave way to welding as the design matured, but the Tiger remained a labor-intensive product. The war economy's shifting priorities complicated supply chains. Crucial alloys, rubber, and electrical components became scarce. Allied bombing disrupted production and transportation, while occupation policies stripped resource-rich territories of materials and workforce. All these pressures forced improvisation, field modifications, simplified sub-assemblies, and sometimes lower-quality substitutes that could undermine reliability. Compare that with Allied approaches, where standardization and mass production dominated. American and British plants specialized in high-volume stamping, interchangeable parts, and assembly line techniques that prioritized throughput. The Sherman, for instance, was not the most formidable tank in a one-on-one duel, but it could be produced in staggering numbers, repaired quickly, and adapted to many roles. That difference in industrial approach, high quality, low volume versus moderate quality, high volume, helps explain why a technically superior platform like the Tiger could not, by itself, shift the strategic balance. Field improvisation also shaped the Tiger's operational life. Unit maintenance crews became adept at jury-rigging solutions from what they could scrounge, drilling out damaged gears, fabricating replacement brackets in the field, or cannibalizing damaged vehicles for critical assemblies. Engineers learned to prioritize maintainability where possible, simplifying wheel assemblies or substituting non-standard parts to keep machines running. Such ingenuity extended the life of many Tigers, but it also masked the underlying fragility of a design pushed to its limits. Human stories around the Tiger are instructive. Letters and memoirs reveal a mix of pride and exhaustion. Many crewmen wrote about the confidence that 100mm of frontal armor imparted, a psychological armor as much as physical. But they also described long maintenance nights, shortages of food or spare parts, and the fear of being isolated with a disabled vehicle. Tank crews formed tight bonds. Their survival often depended on coordination with infantry and engineers. Stories of rescue attempts, where comrades returned under fire to tow away a disabled Tiger, show both bravery and the operational costs of fielding heavy armor. The Tiger's symbolic value circulated widely. Propaganda seized on its might. Newsreels and official photographs emphasized intact, gleaming tanks to boost morale. Opponents too used the Tiger to galvanize response. Tactics were adjusted, anti-tank weapons prioritized, and doctrinal changes implemented. In many ways, the Tiger became a focal point, a technological prompt that forced both sides to innovate. Academics and military analysts have debated the Tiger's cost-effectiveness. Some argue that the tank's presence forced adversaries to allocate disproportionate resources to counter it, thus producing strategic value greater than raw numbers suggest. Others counter that the resources devoted to Tigers, manufacturing complexity, manpower, fuel, and recovery assets, could have yielded greater returns if applied to more numerous, more easily maintained platforms. Both views contain truth. A single Tiger could shape outcomes at the tactical level and inspire fear, but it could not substitute for systemic industrial capacity. The Tiger's endgame unfolded amid the collapsing fronts of 1944 to 1945. As Allied forces drove into Germany, Tigers faced acute shortages, fuel convoys disrupted, workshops overrun, and spare parts unavailable. Many were left in place, stripped of radios and instruments, then abandoned. Others were destroyed in combat or captured. The surviving examples, some intact, some hulks, became trophies, study objects, and in a few cases, restoration projects decades later. What then should we take away from the Tiger's story? First, technological excellence without sustainable industrial support is ultimately fragile. Second, battlefield psychology and reputation matter. They shape decisions, risk assessments, and morale in measurable ways. Third, the war is an interplay between men, machines, and supply chains. The Tiger excelled in the first two, but struggled under the third. In modern military thought, echoes of the Tiger debate remain relevant. Nations still wrestle with whether to field fewer, highly sophisticated systems or larger numbers of simpler, more distributed platforms. The trade-offs are similar: cost versus coverage, precision versus redundancy, complexity versus resilience. The Tiger case offers a historical lens through which to view those enduring questions. Before we close, a few smaller stories help humanize the machine. Consider the maintenance crews who improvise a furnace in a field workshop to bend replacement track shoes, or the young apprentice at Henschel who helped stamp serial numbers into the first production halls. Small acts like these kept a machine of steel alive in a landscape of destruction and scarcity. Or think of the captured Tiger 131. Initially a piece of enemy technology, later an object of fascination and study, restored by teams who saw value in preserving history rather than trophies. As we step away from the metal and smoke, the Tiger stands as a complex symbol. For engineers, it is a monument to design audacity. For soldiers, a source of terror and awe. For historians, a case study in the interaction between technology and logistics. Its legacy is not a simple tale of triumph or failure, but a layered account of choices and consequences. The Tiger remains a striking chapter in the story of armored warfare, a machine that exemplifies the potential and limits of technology under pressure. To study it is not to romanticize war, but to understand how people, industry, and ideas collided in one of history's most violent experiments.